Hello class, Sam Turner here. I hope you're all having a great week. This is my presentation on my findings after attending an educational program. The program I attended was a webinar on strategic leadership in virtual environments. The webinar was led by Dr. Catherine Keaton of the University of Texas at San Antonio. The focus of the webinar was on supporting high-performance teams. The program began with the instructor giving an introduction and some background information. Then the main goal of the program was stated, which was to present accessible information about high-performing teams in VUCA environments. VUCA is an acronym for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. The instructor explained that these environments exist increasingly today because of high mobility in people, high mobility of goods, technological advancements, and ever-changing industries. After this, there was a bit of time for everybody to say how they were doing. The instructor mentioned that tapping into emotions is important because we need to prime our receptivity to the material we're about to discuss. Then we touched on COVID briefly and the new reality that people are dealing with, working remotely, and how that affects leadership and teams. The first aspect of leadership that was really discussed at length was the leaders themselves. We talked about the two aspects of leaders, being and doing. On the being side, the traits associated with high-performing leaders are vision, courage, and character. On the doing side, the actions associated with high-performing leaders are developing a communication strategy, building teams, preparing for the future, and self-care. Next, we moved on to research on high-performing teams. The goal was to look at what behaviors successful teams are engaging in and what they're doing effectively. The research showed that some of the characteristics of high-performing teams were capable and committed team members, team norms that reinforce high-performance culture, and continual improvement. Finally, we circled back to how things relate to the VUCA environments. The big takeaway at the end was that when you encounter these environments, the VUCA response is to simplify, prioritize, and execute. Alright, so I'm going to evaluate some of the elements of the interactive model of program planning for the program that I attended. For starters, I wanted to touch on a few of the assumptions that the model rests on that I thought were relevant. One of these assumptions is the focus on learning and change, which is basically how planners focus on the real-world application of what they're teaching. This was relevant to the class I attended as the instructor kept referring to the current pandemic and making connections to real-world scenarios. Another assumption that I thought was important in the program I attended was making use of technology. The format of the program was a webinar, which meant that the program planner had to use the tools and have the knowledge to set everything up and make sure there were no errors. Finally, a third assumption that I found relevant was understanding that program planners are learners. The instructor of the class I attended was definitely experienced, but there were times where you could tell things didn't go exactly as planned. At one point, it seemed like the instructor really had to pick up the pace because they were worried about running out of time. Alright, so next I'm going to consider some of the learning components from the interactive model. The first component that I thought applied was needs assessment. I think that the instructor did a good job of identifying the needs of the people in attendance. It was nice that they took a little bit of time to check in with everybody at the beginning. The fact that the instructor related all of the information back to how VUCAs might emerge in remote work environments kind of showed that they had taken into account the needs of the audience. The second component that I thought applied is support. The instructor of the class I attended is a professor at UTSA, so I was sort of thinking about their support system. They have the backing of the university and the faculty, and that definitely goes into the program planning process. The next component that I thought was relevant was devising the transfer of learning plans. As the text says, transfer of learning is the effective application by program participants of what they learned as a result of attending an education or training program. It's hard for me to speak for the class as a whole, but personally I think that the program was successful in this category. I think that I definitely absorbed the information, and I've since then been considering how it applies and how I can use it in my life. Another component is designing instructions. This is the planning of how a program is supposed to take place. In the class I attended, there was an overview of all the content at the beginning, which included the learning objective. And the final component that I saw was the goals and objectives component. The goal of the program was stated at the beginning, which was to present accessible information about high-performing teams in VUCA environments. Alright, that's about all I have. Thank you for watching my presentation, and I hope you were able to take something away from it.